Hello, my name is Rachel Reimer, and I'd like to speak to you about my experience with cultural value systems and overcoming ethnocentrism. This message is for anyone who has recently moved to another country or is considering moving to another country. Moving to a new country is very exciting but scary at the same time. In some cases, you may have an idea of what to expect, and in some cases, you may have no clue what to expect, and you're just excited for the adventure of it. In 2014, I moved from Canada to South Africa to do a gap year here, where I would learn how to surf and also get to know Jesus. Leaving home was exciting because I had never traveled across seas before, and it's something I had always wanted to do. I didn't do much research on the culture before leaving. All I really knew was that I was going to a small town named Jeffreys Bay, which was one of the best surf spots in the world, and that's all that really mattered to me. Little did I know that I was heading to a culture completely different to the one I had known so far in my life. Let me tell you a little bit about my culture so that you understand where I come from. Canada is an extremely multicultural country. There are people from all over the world who have immigrated there and brought their cultures with them. Canada is a country that values diversity along with tolerance and respect. We are taught in schools that everyone is different, and we need to accept everyone for who they are. It's common for kids, and adults for that matter, to be very close friends with people who have different religious views to them. I myself went to a Catholic school even though my family is Christian, and in that Catholic school there were even some Muslim kids who attended there. Those kids were treated just the same as everyone else, and they themselves were also very respectful and would even stand during morning prayer, though they did not pray to the same God. From what I've seen, Canada is continually evolving to become more and more tolerant as the next generations are being raised up and taught to be this way. Canada is a culture that values equality. Some people go to extremes. For example, Canada is filled with feminists, which isn't a bad thing. Feminism is what empowered women's rights after all, such as the right to vote. However, others take it to the extreme where they want to be treated exactly the same as men, especially by men. I've seen women get offended when men open the door for them and allow them to go first. I've also seen women get offended when men offer to carry their bags for them. Canada is filled with innovative people along with human rights activists and environmentalists. It is a culture that values order and punctuality. It is a proactive country that welcomes new ideas and always seems to be evolving. Let me tell you about Hofstede's dimensions, Canada's scores versus South Africa's scores. In power distance, Canada scores 39 when South Africa scores 49. In individualism, Canada scores 80 where South Africa scores 65. In masculinity, Canada scores 52, where South Africa scores 63. In uncertainty avoidance, Canada scores 48, and South Africa scores 49. In long-term orientation, Canada scores 36, and South Africa scores 34. In indulgence, Canada scores 68, and South Africa scores 63. These scores and more information are available at hofstede.com/Canada. These scores may seem relatively similar, but I've really noticed the difference in the areas of power distance, individualism, and masculinity, to be specific. Power distance because in Canada, people are treated very equally. For example, the relationships between teachers and students. Teachers do not demand respect in Canada, but in South Africa, students are expected to show respect for teachers. For individualism, I've noticed that society here is much more reliant on each other, and that there are many people who come and beg and expect you to give them things. I'm not sure if that's ever happened to me in Canada, but it happens to me almost on a daily basis here. For masculinity, I've noticed that people's rights and quality of life aren't as highly valued in South Africa as in Canada, and it's made evident in the mass poverty here. These have all been contributing factors to my culture shock. As I said, in 2014, I moved from Canada to South Africa. When I first arrived, I was blown away by this country's beauty. Making the drive from Port Elizabeth to Jeffreys Bay, I already felt a sense of home because certain landscapes on the drive resembled a bit of Alberta and British Columbia, with all the trees and rolling hills. I moved into a house with 16 other people who were also doing the same gap year as me. The next couple of weeks I spent having fun with my housemates as we tried to get to the beach as much as we could and just tan and watch the surfers. It really felt like paradise for me for that first while, and the different language and culture was new and exciting. Mandy Schmidt describes 4 stages of culture shock in her article, How to Deal with Culture Shock While Studying Abroad. For the first couple months when I moved to South Africa, I was in what Mandy Schmidt refers to as the initial euphoria or the honeymoon stage. In this stage, I only saw the beauty of the country and didn't notice much else like the mass poverty or the safety risks. I was always in a big group of people, so safety wasn't really a concern of mine. I had heard some stories about things that would happen even in Jeffreys Bay, about people being robbed or raped or gang violence in the townships, but I never really associated myself with that. It was almost as if I was just listening to the news, and I never thought any of it would affect me. After the first couple months, South Africa had begun to lose its new and exciting feel to me, as I grew more accustomed to the reality that I was a long way from home. I lived in a house filled with people, and it felt very much as though we were stepping on each other's feet, and like we didn't have our own space. I began to enter the second stage of culture shock that Schmidt describes as the irritation and hostility, or the negotiation stage. At this stage, I started to notice the more negative things that I hadn't paid much attention to in the first couple months. We had begun to work with some of the kids in the townships, and we would spend Monday and Wednesday afternoons with them. We would also sometimes drive by the townships, and I would see the shacks that were falling apart and all the rubbish laying around. As I saw the reality of their lives, my heart began to break for these people, and it hit me that the township in Jeffreys Bay was only one out of I don't know how many, maybe hundreds of townships across the country. I couldn't believe that there were actually people who lived like this, and how this was just normal life to them. There were a couple weeks where I just couldn't go into the township and help with the projects like I usually did, because I couldn't bear to see people living like this, and see how most of them had a similar look in their eyes, a look of poverty mindset and hopelessness, that there's nothing they can do about it. I couldn't understand how this was a whole culture in itself within South Africa. I couldn't understand how poverty could go this far. I still don't understand, but I think I've grown more used to it. Poverty was the biggest thing that hit me in my culture shock, but there were also other aspects of it, like how much more people valued respect for elders and also chivalry here. As I said, in Canada, basically everyone treats everyone the same, and while there is respect for elders in Canada, it isn't to the same extent as it is here. Many times in my first few months here, I was told how rude I was for questioning someone older than me, or for not letting them go first when walking or something. But when I didn't know any better, because I was behaving as I always had. Chivalry was the other one that was a big shock to me, but also the one that I really warmed up to and changed my mindset. In Canada, I was very used to carrying things myself, opening the door for myself, and having guys not hold back from their more raunchy mannerisms like burping and telling dirty jokes. But all of a sudden, I was being told that I'm a lady and I shouldn't have to do the heavy lifting. I learned more about the more traditional ways of men treating ladies, and discovered that I really love it and actually prefer it to how it is in Canada, where they don't get treated any differently. Towards the end of my first year, I started entering the third stage of culture shock, the gradual understanding, or the adjustment stage. I started getting more used to the way things were done here, and was able to adjust my perceptions. I'll speak about more how I did this shortly. The last stage of culture shock that Schmidt lists is adaptation. Adaptation, or biculturalism, also known as the mastery stage. Schmidt describes this stage as follows. Reaching a high level of comfort in your new home is the final stage of culture shock. The order of things makes sense. You can talk to strangers with ease, and you understand cultural nuances. Your routine is more natural. Sure, you still miss your friends and family, but your new friends and activities have become part of your daily life. I think that I've begun the fourth and final stage of culture shock, as I've lived here for 2.5 years, and I'm used to the way things operate now. I think that I have many days where I'm extremely homesick. I just miss my mom and the culture in Canada, but South Africa has really found a place in my heart, and it's become a part of me as it's helped shape who I am today. Something that I've realized recently, though, is that you can go through culture shock more than once. It may not always be to the same extent as the first time, but you may experience new things that you didn't initially experience that can shock you. I experienced this just a couple weeks ago. I said before how I never really thought any of the potential danger here would affect me, and it hadn't for 2.5 years. Then one morning, that was just like any other morning, I was on my way to the shop when I was attacked and robbed. I remember thinking, is this really happening to me? It was my own fault for being naive and thinking that that kind of stuff wouldn't touch me. Since then, I've been in the process of not letting that incident affect the way I see this country, and also in the process of not letting fear become a cultural barrier. If I let myself be overcome by fear, it could lead to prejudice towards the coloreds, as it was colored men who attacked me, or one colored man. It could also lead towards hatred towards these people. I refuse to let that bitterness build up and control me. Things that have helped me overcome this fear is that I have quite a few colored friends who I know would never hurt anyone, and this helps me avoid forming racial prejudice. Another thing that's helped me a lot is reading and rereading verses on the Bible about fear. My favorite one is from Deuteronomy 31 verse 6, and it says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." Things could have been way worse, and God has really showed me how He's protected me in this situation and how people were lined up in the right place at the right time to help me. This has been the biggest help as I've worked through this, knowing that God is my protector. The last thing that's helped me overcome fear is just remembering that I've lived here for 2.5 years and nothing like this has ever happened before. Also, it could have happened no matter where I was in the world, because there's crime in every country. I just need to be more wise and careful and make an effort not to put myself in a dangerous situation. I mentioned before that I would elaborate on how I was able to adjust my perceptions on the cultural differences here. A big part of this adjustment was the process of overcoming ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism basically means that your own culture is better, or thinking that your own culture is better than every other culture, and using your own culture as the standard of excellence to measure up to. Ethnocentrism was the biggest cultural barrier that prevented me from understanding and appreciating this country. As you know, when I first came here, I moved into a house with 16 other people. As if moving to the other side of the world in a different culture wasn't enough, these 16 people were also from 5 different nations: Canada, the United States, Holland, New Zealand, and South Africa. None of them were very used to different cultures besides their own. It really helped me through times of homesickness living in a house where a couple other North Americans lived, but it also helped fuel my ethnocentrism. We had many conversations around the dinner table where we would compare countries and cultures and debate, and of course everyone thought their own was the best. One of the lighter arguments that still sometimes goes on is what's better, a braai or a barbecue? I still vote barbecue. When I first got here, I was quite arrogant and had a bit of an attitude problem. This really didn't help me when it came to communicating cross-culturally. Not only did my tone of voice when talking about my culture offend people, but it also closed some of them off from getting to know me at first, thus putting in place a cultural barrier where neither person from either side is able to understand each other. After some times with lots of arguments and clashing, and the Afrikaans people refusing to speak English in front of the English people, we as a house realized we couldn't go on the whole year like this. It got to the point where we sat down and had a discussion where we shared our hearts, how we were misunderstood, and asked questions where we thought we were misunderstanding others. This was the crucial conversation that helped us move forward and work towards a solution. We identified the problem as everyone thought their culture was the best, which is ethnocentrism, and we were too easily offended with each other because we didn't understand each other properly. This conversation really shifted something for us because as we explained how we felt misunderstood, we also explained our own cultures and why we act the way we do. We all made the choice to be more open-minded and inquisitive towards each other, and we tried to stop focusing on our differences and rather discover things that we liked about each other. Something that I learned this year was 5 personality traits to successful intercultural communication. These 5 traits are cultural empathy, open-mindedness, social initiative, emotional stability, and flexibility. Open-mindedness was the strongest contributing factor to overcoming my ethnocentrism, and I think that's because it was the first step. Being able to see things and trying to understand without judging or thinking of how you think things could be done better. In my opinion, the second step would be social initiative, making the effort to get to know people and get to know how they were brought up and why they believe the things they do. The more you get to know people, the more you develop cultural empathy towards them, and as a result, empathy towards the culture itself. As I developed cultural empathy and kept an open mind, I naturally became more emotionally stable because I wasn't as easily thrown off by cultural differences. And as a result of becoming more emotionally stable, I became more flexible and my capacity grew to deal with and respond to cultural differences. I started recognizing patterns of behavior and learned more of what to expect from people and the culture around me. Learning about these 5 personality traits this year, as well as cultural barriers and different value systems, has helped me reflect and understand the process that I've gone through and that I'm still going through. So to conclude, if you're in the place of deciding to move to a new country, or if you have recently moved to a new country, I want to encourage you that yes, you probably will experience culture shock, And yes, you can get through it. The simplest advice I can give you is to be open to things being different than what you're used to from the beginning. Something that I wish I did was try to learn more about South Africa's culture before coming here. So I would advise you to dig in and learn as much as you can and mentally prepare yourself. But despite all the challenges of adapting to a different culture, I can honestly say that coming here was the best decision of my life, and I think it's helped me grow so much and shaped me into the person I am today. I really think that immersing yourself in a different culture and the process of learning how to adapt to it is one of the best experiences a person could have, and I would recommend it to everyone. Thank you for listening.